Marcus Chen had always been small for a human. At 5 feet 6 inches and barely 140 pounds, he looked more like an accountant than a soldier. His quiet demeanor and tendency to avoid conflict made him an easy target for ridicule among the other species in the Galactic Defense Coalition. The towering Krillian warriors would laugh at his size, their blue-scaled faces twisted in amusement as they watched him struggle with equipment designed for beings twice his mass. The insectoid Zephyrians would click their mandibles dismissively when he passed, their compound eyes gleaming with what could only be described as contempt. The GDC military base on Kepler 442b housed representatives from 12 different species, all supposedly united in defending the galaxy against the rising threat of the Void Syndicate. In reality, the base felt more like a high school cafeteria where humans occupied the lowest rung of the social ladder. Most alien species viewed humans as weak, short-lived creatures who had stumbled into space travel through luck rather than merit. They tolerated human presence in the coalition only because Earth provided valuable resources and strategic positioning in the Outer Rim territories. Marcus worked in the base's intelligence division, analyzing intercepted communications and mapping enemy movements. His colleagues barely acknowledged his existence, treating him like a piece of furniture that occasionally produced useful reports. Commander Thex Vor, a massive Gorlathan with skin like granite and 4 arms that could crush a human skull without effort, assigned Marcus the most mundane tasks: filing reports, organizing data crystals, and monitoring routine patrol communications became his daily routine. During briefings, Marcus would sit in the back corner while the real soldiers discussed strategy. The Krillian shock troopers would pound their fists on tables as they planned frontal assaults. The nimble Salathi scouts would weave through holographic displays, pointing out infiltration routes with their elongated fingers. The heavily armored Mechlon engineers would calculate structural vulnerabilities with mechanical precision, and Marcus would take notes, invisible and ignored. The other human soldiers on the base fared little better, but at least they had each other for company. Marcus preferred solitude, spending his off-duty hours in the abandoned observation deck that overlooked the planet's twin moons. He would sit there for hours, watching the stars and thinking about home. Earth felt like a distant dream, a place where his quiet nature hadn't marked him as prey. Everything changed the day the Void Syndicate attacked Proxima Station. The distress signal arrived during the morning briefing, crackling through the communication array with desperate urgency. Proxima Station, a crucial supply depot serving 36 colony worlds, was under assault by a Syndicate fleet. The station's defensive platforms had been overwhelmed, and enemy boarding parties were cutting through the hull like a hot knife through butter. Commander Thex Vor's 4 arms moved with practiced efficiency as he activated the base's emergency protocols. Warning lights bathed the briefing room in red as all available ships prepared for immediate departure. The Krillian warriors roared their battle cries, eager to test their strength against Syndicate forces. The Salathi scouts began calculating jump coordinates, while the Mechlon engineers ran diagnostic checks on weapon systems. Marcus found himself assigned to the intelligence support vessel, Nightfall, a sleek ship designed for electronic warfare and reconnaissance. The vessel's commander, Captain Geltar of the Arion species, made it clear that Marcus was only there because regulations required a human representative on all major operations. The captain's feathered crest bristled with irritation as she explained that Marcus would monitor communications while staying out of everyone else's way. The journey to Proxima Station took 18 hours through hyperspace. During the trip, Marcus studied everything he could about the Void Syndicate. The organization had emerged from the galaxy's lawless frontier regions, recruiting from species that had been marginalized or conquered by the major powers. Their technology was crude but effective, combining salvaged equipment with desperate innovation. What made them truly dangerous was their complete disregard for conventional warfare rules. They used chemical weapons, targeted civilian populations, and showed no mercy to prisoners. As the Coalition fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Proxima Station, the scope of the disaster became clear. The massive space station, normally a beacon of light in the void, now burned like a dying star. Debris fields marked where defensive platforms had made their final stands. Syndicate vessels swarmed around the station like carrion feeders, their hulls painted in the characteristic black and red of the organization. The Coalition fleet outnumbered the Syndicate forces 3-1, but the enemy had prepared well. Minefields blocked the direct approach routes, while concealed weapon platforms provided covering fire. The battle began with long-range exchanges that lit up space with energy beams and missile explosions. Marcus watched from the Nightfall's communication station as the tactical display updated in real time. The Coalition's initial assault stalled against the Syndicate's defensive network. Krillian assault ships found themselves trapped in crossfires while trying to breach the mine barriers. Salathi infiltration craft discovered that the enemy had somehow learned their stealth frequencies. Even the mighty Mechlon dreadnoughts struggled against weapon platforms that seemed to anticipate their every move. Hours passed as the battle raged without decisive result. Casualties mounted on both sides, while Proxima Station continued to burn. Marcus noticed something troubling in the communication intercepts he was monitoring. The Syndicate forces were coordinating their defense with impossible precision, as if they knew exactly what the Coalition would do before they did it. Captain Jeltar paced the bridge with growing frustration, her talons clicking against the deck plating. The other officers muttered among themselves about how the humans' intelligence reports had clearly been inadequate. Marcus felt their stares like physical weight, knowing that he would bear the blame for the operation's failure. That was when Marcus made a connection that changed everything. While reviewing the intercepted Syndicate communications, he noticed irregularities in their encryption patterns. The messages weren't just random battlefield chatter. They contained embedded coordinate data that corresponded to Coalition ship movements. Someone was feeding the Syndicate real-time intelligence about the fleet's positions and intentions. Marcus's hands trembled as he traced the signal back to its source. The embedded data packets were being transmitted on a frequency that matched the Coalition's secure command channel. The traitor wasn't some distant spy or compromised communication relay. They were here on one of the Coalition ships, watching the battle unfold and helping the enemy counter every tactical move. He brought his findings to Captain Jeltar, but she dismissed his concerns with a wave of her feathered hand. The idea that someone in the Coalition fleet would betray their own forces seemed impossible to her. Aryans valued honor above all else, and she couldn't conceive of such treachery. She ordered Marcus to return to his station and focus on his assigned duties. But Marcus couldn't let it go. He continued monitoring the communications traffic, building a detailed picture of how the intelligence was being passed to the Syndicate. The traitor was clever, embedding their messages within routine status reports and navigation updates. To a casual observer, everything would appear normal. Only someone specifically looking for the pattern would notice the hidden data. As the battle entered its 6th hour, the Coalition fleet found itself in an increasingly desperate situation. The Syndicate forces had managed to lure several Coalition ships into a carefully prepared trap. Energy mines detonated in sequence, crippling the Krillian flagship and sending it tumbling toward the station's gravity well. Rescue ships that moved to assist found themselves under concentrated fire from previously hidden weapon platforms. Marcus watched in horror as good soldiers died because someone was selling their positions to the enemy. His quiet nature had always made him reluctant to speak up, but now lives hung in the balance. He made a decision that would change his life forever. Instead of going through official channels again, Marcus took matters into his own hands. He began crafting his own embedded messages, using the same frequency and encryption methods as the traitor. But instead of helping the enemy, he fed them false information. When the Coalition planned to attack the station's port docking bays, Marcus's false intelligence suggested they would target the starboard side instead. The results were immediate and dramatic. Syndicate forces rushed to defend areas that weren't under assault, leaving their actual targets vulnerable. Coalition ships broke through the defensive line for the first time since the battle began. The Krillian warriors cheered as their assault transports finally reached the station's hull. But Marcus wasn't finished. He had identified the traitor's signal pattern well enough to trace it back to its source. The betrayer was Commander Clix Noth, the Zephyrian tactical coordinator aboard the command ship Dominion. The insectoid officer had been providing targeting data to the Syndicate in exchange for safe passage through their territory for Zephyrian trade convoys. Marcus faced an impossible choice. He could expose the traitor through official channels, but that would take time the Coalition fleet didn't have. More ships were dying every minute while Clixnoth continued to feed information to the enemy. Or he could take direct action, using his access to the communication systems to neutralize the threat himself. The quiet intelligence analyst chose action over protocol. Working with desperate speed, Marcus crafted a sophisticated virus designed to infiltrate Clixnoth's communication equipment. The malicious code would corrupt any outgoing transmissions while making it appear that the equipment was functioning normally. To the traitor, it would seem like their messages were being sent successfully. In reality, only garbage data would reach the Syndicate forces. Deploying the virus required Marcus to hack into the Dominion's communication array, a serious violation of military protocol that could result in court-martial and imprisonment. He hesitated for only a moment before activating the program. As the virus spread through Clixnoth's systems, the Syndicate's defensive coordination began to collapse. Without real-time intelligence about coalition movements, the enemy found themselves reacting too slowly to changing tactical situations. Their weapon platforms fired at empty space while coalition ships maneuvered into attack positions. Mine barriers detonated prematurely, clearing safe passage routes for the rescue fleet. The tide of battle turned with shocking speed. Coalition forces that had been pinned down for hours suddenly broke free of their entrapments. The Syndicate's carefully orchestrated defense crumbled as their commanders lost track of the Coalition's true intentions. Within 2 hours of Marcus's intervention, the enemy fleet was in full retreat. But the victory came with a price. As Coalition forces boarded Proxima Station to assess the damage, they discovered that the Syndicate had executed all remaining civilian personnel before withdrawing. Thousands of innocent people had died during the prolonged battle, and Marcus couldn't escape the feeling that he bore some responsibility for their deaths. If he had acted sooner, if he had been more insistent about the traitor, perhaps those lives could have been saved. The aftermath of the battle was chaos. Investigation teams swarmed over the rescued station, while medical ships ferried wounded personnel back to Coalition bases. Commander Clix Noth was quietly arrested when investigators discovered the corrupted communication equipment in his quarters. The Zephyrian officer offered no resistance. His compound eyes dulled with resignation. Captain Geltar called Marcus to her ready room 3 days after the battle. The Aryan commander's feathered crest was held high in a display of respect that Marcus had never seen directed toward him before. She acknowledged that his actions had saved the fleet, but she also made it clear that his methods had been highly irregular. Military protocol existed for good reasons, and violations could not be ignored, regardless of their outcomes. Marcus accepted responsibility for his actions without complaint. He had known the risks when he chose to act outside proper channels. The important thing was that the Coalition fleet had survived, and the traitor had been exposed. His own fate seemed insignificant by comparison. But fate, it seemed, had other plans for the quiet intelligence analyst. As news of the Proxima Station battle spread through Coalition space, so did stories about the human who had single-handedly turned the tide of the engagement. The details grew more dramatic with each retelling. Some versions claimed that Marcus had fought his way through an entire syndicate boarding party. Others suggested that he had piloted a fighter craft through the enemy fleet while broadcasting false orders. The truth was far more mundane. But apparently, truth was less interesting than legend. What Marcus didn't realize was that his actions had caught the attention of people far more dangerous than coalition military investigators. In the lawless frontier regions where the Void Syndicate recruited its followers, word was spreading about a human intelligence operative who had cost them a major victory. The organization began compiling a file on Marcus Chen, marking him as a priority target for elimination. The name they assigned to his file would soon become known throughout the galaxy. They called him the Reaper. 6 months after Proxima Station, Marcus Chen found himself assigned to a new posting that was clearly intended as punishment. The research outpost on Kepler 186F was officially classified as a strategic monitoring station, but everyone knew it was where the coalition sent personnel they wanted to forget. The planet's harsh environment and isolation from major shipping lanes made it perfect for exile disguised as duty assignment. Marcus didn't mind the solitude. The outpost housed only 30 coalition personnel, mostly scientists studying the planet's unusual electromagnetic properties. The small crew meant fewer opportunities for conflict with alien colleagues who still viewed humans as inferior. He spent his days monitoring deep space communications and filing reports that nobody would ever read. The planet itself was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way. Massive crystal formations jutted from purple sand deserts, while aurora-like phenomena danced across skies filled with 3 different moons. The electromagnetic storms that made the planet valuable for research also made it nearly impossible to maintain reliable communication with the outside galaxy. Messages could take weeks to reach their destinations, and responses took just as long to return. Marcus had been on Kepler 186F for 3 months when the Void Syndicate found him. The attack came without warning during the planet's longest night cycle. Marcus was alone in the communication center, monitoring routine traffic from distant star systems when proximity alarms began screaming throughout the outpost. 3 Syndicate vessels had somehow approached the planet without triggering the early warning sensors, using the electromagnetic storms as cover for their approach. The outpost's defensive capabilities were minimal by design. 2 automated pulse cannons and a basic shield generator were sufficient to deter pirates or raiders, but they offered little protection against a determined military assault. The Syndicate ships opened fire immediately, overwhelming the shields within minutes and reducing the pulse cannons to molten slag. Marcus activated the emergency beacon, knowing that help was days away at minimum. The nearest coalition patrol was in the Centauri system, and even if they departed immediately upon receiving the distress signal, they wouldn't arrive in time to affect the outcome. The outpost personnel would have to survive on their own until rescue arrived. The Syndicate forces landed near the main complex, disembarking soldiers that Marcus recognized from intelligence briefings. Thalgoran mercenaries, known for their brutality and complete lack of mercy. Their reptilian faces bore the ritual scars that marked them as members of the death cult that had taken over their homeworld. These weren't ordinary raiders looking for supplies or technology. They were assassins with a specific target in mind. Dr. Isel Ima, the Vorthan research director, took charge of the outpost's defense with admirable efficiency. The bird-like scientist organized the personnel into defensive positions while sealing critical sections of the facility. Her knowledge of the outpost's layout allowed her to channel the attackers into killing zones where the defenders could concentrate their fire. For several hours, the small garrison held their ground against superior numbers. But the Thalgorans weren't trying to overrun the facility quickly. They were conducting a systematic search, moving from room to room with methodical precision. Marcus realized with growing horror that they were looking for someone specific, Every time they captured a defender, they would show them a holographic image before executing them. The image was too distant for Marcus to see clearly, but he had a terrible suspicion about its contents. The outpost's defensive perimeter slowly contracted as Thalgoran assault teams seized control of key positions. The defenders fell back to the central complex, sealing blast doors and preparing for a final stand. Dr. Isalima gathered the remaining personnel in the main laboratory, using the room's reinforced walls and independent life support systems to create a temporary fortress. Marcus found himself crouched behind an overturned desk with Lieutenant Torres, one of the few other humans on the outpost. The young Marine's hands shook as he checked his rifle's ammunition count for the third time in as many minutes. His face was pale with fear, but his voice remained steady as he reported on the tactical situation. The Thalgorans had surrounded the laboratory and were preparing to breach the main entrance. Their weapons would cut through the blast doors within an hour, and the defenders lacked the firepower to repel a direct assault. Dr. Isalima was trying to raise the coalition fleet on the emergency channel, but the electromagnetic storms continued to interfere with long-range communications. That was when Marcus made his second life-changing decision. While the other defenders focused on the main entrance, Marcus slipped away through a maintenance tunnel that connected to the facility's power distribution center. The cramped passage was barely wide enough for a human, which explained why the larger Thalgoran troops hadn't discovered it. He crawled through darkness for what felt like hours, guided only by the faint glow of emergency lighting strips. The power center controlled every electrical system in the outpost, from life support to communication arrays. Marcus had studied the facility's schematics during his assignment, partly from boredom and partly from his natural inclination to understand how things worked. Now that knowledge would determine whether he and his colleagues lived or died. The Thalgorans had posted guards at the power center's main entrance, but they hadn't expected anyone to approach through the maintenance tunnels. Marcus emerged behind their position, moving with a silence that surprised even him. His small size and quiet nature, once sources of mockery, now became deadly advantages. The guards died without raising an alarm, their throats cut by Marcus's utility knife before they could cry out. Alone in the power center, Marcus began implementing a plan that was either brilliant or suicidal. He rerouted power from non-essential systems to overload the facility's atmospheric processors. The machines that normally maintained breathable air throughout the outpost began producing a toxic mixture that would be lethal to most oxygen-breathing species. The process would take time to reach dangerous levels, but it would force the Thalgorans to rely on their breathing apparatus. Next, Marcus manipulated the facility's gravity generators to create unstable fields throughout the main complex. The artificial gravity began fluctuating randomly, sometimes disappearing entirely and sometimes increasing to crushing levels. The effect would disorient the attackers and make coordinated movement nearly impossible. But his most dangerous modification involved the outpost's reactor core. Marcus began a controlled destabilization of the main reactor, pushing it toward a cascade failure that would consume the entire facility. The process was irreversible once initiated, giving everyone in the outpost less than 2 hours to evacuate before the explosion. It was a desperate gamble that would destroy the research station, but might also eliminate the Syndicate assault force. The effects of Marcus's sabotage became apparent within minutes. The Thalgoran troops found themselves struggling to breathe as toxic gases seeped through their breathing apparatus filters. The fluctuating gravity fields threw their carefully planned assault into chaos as soldiers found themselves floating helplessly or pinned to the floor by excessive weight. Dr. Isalima's voice crackled over the facility's communication system as she realized what was happening. The Vorthan scientist was brilliant enough to recognize Marcus's strategy immediately. She began coordinating an evacuation of the laboratory, leading the surviving defenders toward the outpost's shuttle bay, while the confused Thalgorans struggled to maintain their assault. Marcus remained in the power center, monitoring the reactor's destabilization while tracking the movements of both defenders and attackers through the facility's internal sensors. He watched as his colleagues fought their way through disoriented syndicate forces, using the environmental chaos he had created to level the playing field. The defenders' knowledge of the facility's layout gave them crucial advantages as they navigated the unstable gravity fields and toxic atmosphere. The Thalgoran commander finally realized that his mission was collapsing. The reptilian warrior's scarred face twisted with rage as he ordered his troops to withdraw to their ships. The systematic search for their target would have to be abandoned in favor of simple survival. But before leaving, he activated a homing beacon that would guide other syndicate forces to the outpost's location. The evacuation proceeded with desperate efficiency. Dr. Isolima managed to get most of the personnel aboard the facility's 3 shuttlecraft before the reactor reached critical instability. The small ships launched just as the first syndicate vessel began its own departure sequence. Both groups raced to reach minimum safe distance before the outpost's reactor exploded. Marcus was the last person to leave the facility. He remained at the power center's controls until the final possible moment, ensuring that the reactor's destabilization would proceed as planned. Only when the radiation levels reached lethal intensities did he finally run for the shuttle bay, where Lieutenant Torres waited at the controls of the last remaining craft. The shuttle cleared the planet's atmosphere just as the outpost's reactor achieved cascade failure. The explosion was visible from the planet's 3 moons, a brilliant flash of light that temporarily outshone the local star. The electromagnetic pulse generated by the blast disabled several of the syndicate ships, sending them tumbling toward the planet's surface in uncontrolled descents. But the victory came with a cost that Marcus was only beginning to understand. Among the wreckage of the destroyed outpost, syndicate recovery teams found evidence that their primary target had escaped. The holographic image they had been showing to captured personnel was indeed a picture of Marcus Chen, compiled from security footage taken during the Proxima Station battle. The Void Syndicate had committed significant resources to eliminating the human intelligence analyst, only to see their forces destroyed by the very person they had come to kill. The failure at Kepler 186F elevated Marcus's status within syndicate target lists from priority elimination to obsession. The organization's leadership couldn't understand how a single human had twice defeated their carefully planned operations. They began assigning their best operatives to study Marcus's methods and psychology, searching for weaknesses they could exploit. More importantly, they began spreading the story of Marcus's actions throughout the criminal underworld. The tale grew more dramatic with each telling, describing a human operative who could appear anywhere without warning and destroy entire military installations single-handedly. The syndicate leadership intended for these stories to intimidate their enemies and rally their followers against a common threat. Instead, the stories began attracting attention from other criminal organizations that wanted to test themselves against the legendary human operative. Bounty hunters and assassins from across the galaxy started seeking contracts related to Marcus Chen. The Void Syndicate had inadvertently created a mythology around their target that was drawing more hunters to their cause. The Coalition rescue fleet arrived at Kepler 186F 12 hours after the outpost's destruction. Captain Geltar commanded the operation, her feathered crest bristling with tension as her ship searched the debris field for survivors. The discovery that Marcus had not only survived, but had also destroyed a syndicate assault force sent shockwaves through the Coalition command structure. Admiral Korthvan, the Meklon Supreme Commander of Coalition forces, personally debriefed Marcus aboard the flagship Determination. The mechanical being's optical sensors focused on the human with an intensity that suggested either fascination or concern. The Admiral's questions focused not just on the tactical details of the engagement, but also on Marcus's decision-making process and psychological state. Marcus answered the questions honestly, describing his actions as necessary responses to immediate threats. He emphasized that he had no desire to become some kind of special operations operative, preferring to return to his quiet work in intelligence analysis. The attention and notoriety made him uncomfortable, especially when he realized that his actions had resulted in the deaths of dozens of people, including coalition personnel who hadn't evacuated in time. But Admiral Korthvan had different plans for the human who was becoming known throughout the galaxy as the Reaper. The mechanical admiral explained that the Void Syndicate was expanding its operations throughout the frontier regions, recruiting new species, and acquiring advanced technologies through raids and infiltration. Traditional coalition military responses had proven inadequate against an enemy that refused to follow conventional warfare rules. The organization needed new approaches to combat an unconventional threat. Marcus found himself assigned to a classified unit designated as Deep Operations Division. The DoD was theoretically an intelligence-gathering organization, but its actual mission involved conducting covert operations against syndicate targets throughout coalition space. The unit's commander, Colonel Sarah Martinez, was one of the few humans to achieve high rank within the coalition military structure. Colonel Martinez was everything that Marcus wasn't. Tall, confident, and aggressive, she had earned her position through a series of spectacular military victories against pirate fleets and rebel colonies. Her reputation for creative tactical solutions had brought her to Admiral Korthvan's attention when the DoD was formed. She viewed Marcus's assignment to her unit with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. The colonel's briefing made it clear that Marcus would be operating under different rules than traditional coalition forces. The DoD had authorization to conduct operations in neutral space, use non-coalition equipment, and employ methods that regular military units couldn't officially sanction. The missions would be dangerous, with minimal support and no guarantee of rescue if things went wrong. Marcus accepted the assignment despite his reservations about the unit's methods. The alternative was reassignment to another isolated outpost where the syndicate would inevitably find him again. At least with the DoD, he would be actively fighting back against an organization that had marked him for death. The choice between passive victimhood and active resistance wasn't really a choice at all. His first mission briefing took place aboard the stealth ship Whisper, a vessel that officially didn't exist in any coalition records. The ship's technology combined systems from a dozen different species, creating capabilities that no single military force could match. The crew was equally diverse, including soldiers and specialists who had been recruited from the edges of civilized space. The mission target was a syndicate facility on the asteroid mining station Series 7. Intelligence reports suggested that the station was being used to develop new weapons for the organization's expansion into coalition space. The facility was heavily defended and located in a system controlled by neutral parties who wouldn't appreciate coalition military intervention. Marcus would be inserted onto the station alone, tasked with gathering intelligence about the weapon development program and sabotaging key systems if possible. The mission would require him to operate under a false identity while avoiding detection by syndicate security forces. Failure would mean certain death, and success might only postpone the inevitable confrontation with an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. As the Whisper approached its destination, Marcus studied the mission files and tried to prepare for what lay ahead. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being transformed into something he had never wanted to become. The quiet intelligence analyst who had wanted nothing more than to serve his time and return home was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone darker and more dangerous. The galaxy was about to learn why they called him the Reaper. Series 7 hung in space like a malformed metal fruit, its surface bristling with mining equipment and defensive installations. The asteroid station served as neutral territory where criminals, traders, and refugees could conduct business without interference from major galactic powers. Its labyrinthine interior housed everything from black market weapons dealers to exotic food vendors, creating a perfect environment for syndicate operations to hide among legitimate commerce. Marcus approached the station aboard a modified cargo hauler that had seen better decades. The ship's registration identified him as a freelance data broker named Eric Volkov, complete with forged credentials and a fabricated history that would withstand casual scrutiny. His appearance had been altered with cosmetic modifications that changed his facial structure and added 20 pounds of muscle through synthetic implants. Even his own mother wouldn't have recognized him. The transformation into Eric Volkov represented months of preparation and training with the Deep Operations Division. Marcus had learned skills he never imagined needing: advanced combat techniques, infiltration methods, psychological manipulation, and the art of becoming someone else entirely. The quiet intelligence analyst still existed somewhere inside him, but Eric Volkov was a creation designed specifically for survival in the galaxy's most dangerous places. Docking at Series 7 required navigating through a maze of traffic control procedures designed to discourage unwanted attention. The station's administrators asked few questions about cargo or destination, but they maintained detailed records of every ship that used their facilities. Marcus submitted his falsified documentation while studying the tactical displays that showed the station's defensive capabilities. The Syndicate had chosen their location well. Series 7's position in the neutral zone meant that coalition forces couldn't operate openly without causing diplomatic incidents. The station's natural defenses, combined with its civilian population of nearly 50,000 people, made direct military action impossible. Any attack would result in massive casualties among innocents who had no connection to criminal activities. Marcus's mission parameters reflected these constraints. He was authorized to gather intelligence and conduct limited sabotage operations, but he could not take actions that might endanger the civilian population. The restriction made his job significantly more difficult, but it also aligned with his own moral principles. The Syndicate might use innocent people as shields, but that didn't make those people acceptable casualties. The station's interior was a three-dimensional maze of corridors, chambers, and transit tubes that had been carved from the asteroid's natural rock formations. Different sections operated under different jurisdictions, with their own security forces and local laws. The Syndicate facility was located in Section 7, an industrial area dominated by processing plants and manufacturing centers, where unusual activities would blend into the background noise of legitimate operations. Marcus spent his first 3 days on the station establishing his cover identity and mapping the facility's security arrangements. Eric Volkov rented a small office in the commercial district and began conducting actual data brokerage work to maintain his disguise. The transactions were real, involving the sale of market information and shipping schedules to legitimate buyers throughout the sector. The work also provided perfect cover for reconnaissance activities. Data brokers needed to maintain extensive communication networks and information-gathering capabilities that could be redirected toward intelligence operations without attracting attention. Marcus used his legitimate business contacts to learn about Section 7's operations and identify potential access routes to the Syndicate facility. What he discovered during his initial surveillance was more disturbing than the mission briefings had suggested. The Syndicate wasn't just developing new weapons at Series 7, they were conducting human experimentation using captured coalition personnel as test subjects. The facility's power consumption patterns and waste disposal methods indicated biological research programs that violated every treaty governing the treatment of prisoners. Marcus faced a moral dilemma that his training hadn't prepared him to handle. His mission orders specifically prohibited actions that might compromise the intelligence-gathering operation or endanger civilian lives. Attempting to rescue the prisoners would almost certainly trigger security responses that would expose his presence and abort the mission. But allowing the experiments to continue violated everything he believed about the value of human life. He chose a middle path that reflected both his tactical training and his fundamental decency. Instead of mounting a rescue operation, Marcus began systematically sabotaging the facility's research programs through subtler methods. Computer viruses destroyed experimental data, while power fluctuations ruined sensitive equipment. Contaminated supplies rendered biological samples useless, while communication disruptions prevented researchers from coordinating their activities. The sabotage campaign required Marcus to access the facility's internal networks without alerting security personnel to his presence. He accomplished this by creating a series of false identities within the station's temporary worker pool, allowing him to gain access to different sections as a maintenance technician, supply clerk, and waste disposal specialist. Each identity provided opportunities to plant surveillance devices and sabotage equipment. Dr. Velthar, the syndicate's chief researcher, began to suspect that his facility was under attack after the third major system failure in 2 weeks. The Kravarian scientist's multiple arms moved with agitated precision as he reviewed security footage and conducted equipment inspections. His compound eyes missed nothing, but they couldn't identify threats that came from inside the facility's own support systems. Marcus watched the researcher's growing paranoia through hidden cameras he had installed throughout the complex. Dr. Velthar's responses to the sabotage campaign revealed information about the facility's true capabilities and strategic importance. The experiments weren't just random acts of cruelty. They were part of a systematic program to develop biological weapons that could target specific genetic markers found in different alien species. The implications were staggering. If the syndicate succeeded in weaponizing genetic targeting, they could launch attacks that would kill only members of specific species while leaving others unharmed. Such weapons could destroy entire civilizations without damaging infrastructure or resources. The research represented a potential genocide tool that could reshape the balance of power throughout the galaxy. Marcus transmitted his discoveries to the Deep Operations Division through encrypted channels buried within routine commercial communications. The response came back within hours. Abort the intelligence-gathering mission and destroy the facility by any means necessary. The biological weapons research represented an existential threat that outweighed all other considerations, including his own survival and the safety of civilian populations. The new mission parameters gave Marcus authorization to use methods that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. He began planning an operation that would neutralize the threat while minimizing casualties among innocent station residents. The plan required precise timing and a willingness to sacrifice himself if necessary to prevent the biological weapons from reaching completion. Marcus started by identifying the facility's most vulnerable points. The research laboratories were located near the station's main power distribution center, making it possible to create a catastrophic overload that would destroy the experimental data and equipment. The biological containment systems could be compromised through the air circulation networks, ensuring that any surviving organisms would be eliminated by exposure to space vacuum. But the most critical element involved the facility's computer networks, which contained backup copies of all research data. Simply destroying the physical infrastructure wouldn't eliminate the biological weapons program if the syndicate could rebuild using archived information. Marcus needed to ensure that every piece of data was corrupted or destroyed, leaving nothing that could be recovered later. He began implementing the destruction plan by infiltrating the facility's central computer core during the station's night cycle. The chamber was heavily protected by both electronic security systems and physical guards, requiring Marcus to use every skill he had learned during his transformation into a covert operative. He moved through the facility like a ghost, leaving no trace of his passage while systematically planting charges and viruses throughout the critical systems. The operation took 4 hours to complete, during which Marcus came within inches of discovery multiple times. A routine security patrol passed within arm's reach of his hiding position behind a power conduit. A maintenance technician nearly discovered one of his explosive charges during a routine inspection. Dr. Velthar himself walked past Marcus's location while conducting a late-night review of the laboratory security arrangements. Each near miss reminded Marcus of how far he had come from the quiet intelligence analyst who had struggled to find his place in the coalition military structure. The skills he was using came naturally now, as if they had always been part of his nature. The transformation was so complete that he sometimes wondered if Eric Volkov had become more real than Marcus Chen. The destruction sequence began at precisely 0347 station time, when most of the civilian population was asleep and the facility operated with minimal staffing. Marcus triggered the computer viruses first, watching as they spread through the syndicate's networks like digital cancer. Research files disappeared while backup systems corrupted themselves beyond recovery. Years of experimental data vanished in minutes. The power overload came next, causing massive electrical failures throughout Section 7. The lights went out as emergency systems struggled to cope with the cascading failures. In the darkness, Marcus moved through the facility like an avenging spirit, eliminating guards and researchers who might escape with knowledge of the biological weapons program. He found Dr. Velthar in the main laboratory, frantically trying to save critical research samples from the failing containment systems. The Kravarian scientist's multiple arms worked with desperate efficiency as he transferred biological materials to portable storage units. His compound eyes reflected panic as he realized that his life's work was being systematically destroyed. Marcus appeared behind him like a shadow, his utility knife finding the gaps in the scientist's chitinous exoskeleton with surgical precision. Dr. Velthar died without making a sound, his research samples spilling across the laboratory floor to be consumed by the spreading electrical fires. The final phase of the operation involved breaching the facility's hull to ensure complete destruction of any remaining biological materials. Marcus had planted shaped charges throughout the structural weak points, designed to create catastrophic decompression that would vent the entire complex into space. The explosion would appear to be an industrial accident, providing cover for the true nature of the sabotage operation. But as Marcus prepared to detonate the final charges, he discovered that the syndicate had prepared for exactly this scenario. Emergency protocols had sealed the facility's most critical sections, preserving samples of the biological weapons research in hardened storage containers that could survive hull breaches and electrical failures. The destruction of the main laboratory hadn't eliminated the threat entirely. Marcus found himself trapped in the sealed facility with a dozen heavily armed syndicate soldiers who had been deployed to protect the research samples during the emergency. The guards were experienced professionals who knew the facility's layout better than he did. They had superior numbers, better equipment, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. By every conventional measure, Marcus's situation was hopeless. That was when the galaxy learned why they called him the Reaper. What followed in the darkened corridors of the syndicate facility became the stuff of legend. Marcus moved through the complex like death incarnate, using every shadow and every piece of cover to deadly advantage. His small size allowed him to fit through ventilation ducts and maintenance passages that the larger guards couldn't follow. His quiet nature became supernatural silence that allowed him to appear and disappear without warning. One by one, the guards died. Some were found with their throats cut, killed so quietly that their companions never heard them fall. Others triggered booby traps that had been fashioned from scavenged equipment, devices that turned the facility's own systems into weapons. A few simply vanished, their bodies hidden so well that the remaining guards began to panic about invisible attackers. The psychological warfare was as devastating as the physical violence. Marcus left messages written in the guards' blood, cryptic warnings that suggested he knew their names and personal histories. He sabotaged their equipment to malfunction at critical moments, making them doubt their own abilities and equipment. He used the facility's communication systems to broadcast whispered threats that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. By the time Marcus reached the hardened storage area where the biological samples were kept, only 3 guards remained alive. The surviving soldiers had barricaded themselves in the storage chamber, using the research containers as improvised fortifications while they waited for reinforcements that would never come. The station's security forces were too busy dealing with the power failures and fires to investigate what was happening in the abandoned industrial section. Marcus didn't assault the barricaded position directly. Instead, he began a patient siege that slowly drove the defenders toward madness. He cut power to their section, leaving them in complete darkness. He introduced toxic gases into their air supply, forcing them to rely on emergency breathing apparatus with limited duration. He used sonic devices to fill their environment with subsonic frequencies that caused nausea and disorientation. The siege lasted 6 hours before the last guard finally broke. The Thalgoran soldier abandoned his post and fled into the facility's maze of corridors, choosing the uncertainty of the darkness over the certainty of slow death in the storage chamber. Marcus hunted him through the facility like a predator stalking wounded prey, taking his time to savor the fear and desperation that radiated from his victim. When it was over, Marcus stood alone in the storage chamber surrounded by the biological weapons research that had cost so many lives to develop. The hardened containers represented years of work by some of the galaxy's most brilliant and twisted minds. Their contents could potentially destroy entire civilizations if they fell into the wrong hands. Marcus destroyed them all. He used thermite charges to melt the storage containers into slag while flooding the chamber with corrosive gases that would eliminate any surviving biological material. The research that Dr. Velthar had died trying to protect became nothing more than toxic waste that would pose no threat to anyone. The facility's final destruction came as anticlimax. Marcus triggered the hull breach charges while evacuating through an emergency airlock, watching as the complex vented its contents into space. The Syndicate's biological weapons program died with the facility, leaving only scattered reports and rumors to mark its existence. Marcus Chen returned to the Deep Operations Division to find that his legend had grown beyond all proportion to his actual actions. The story of the Reaper's assault on Series 7 spread throughout criminal networks like wildfire, describing impossible feats of combat prowess and supernatural abilities. Some versions claimed that he had single-handedly fought an army of Syndicate soldiers, while others suggested that he could become invisible at will. The reality was far more mundane, but equally effective. Marcus had simply applied intelligence, patience, and ruthless determination to overcome superior numbers and firepower. His success came not from superhuman abilities, but from a willingness to become the monster that circumstances required. The transformation was complete in ways that went far beyond cosmetic modifications and false identities. Colonel Martinez debriefed him in her private office aboard the Whisper, her expression showing a mixture of admiration and concern. The successful mission had eliminated a major threat to Coalition security, but it had also revealed capabilities in Marcus that even the DoD hadn't expected. His psychological evaluation scores showed changes that suggested fundamental alterations to his personality structure. The quiet intelligence analyst who had joined the Coalition military to serve his time and go home no longer existed. In his place stood something harder and more dangerous, a weapon that had been forged in the crucible of necessity and tempered by violence. Marcus Chen might still exist somewhere inside, but the Reaper had become the dominant personality. Admiral Korthvan's new assignment reflected the Coalition's recognition of what Marcus had become. Instead of returning to intelligence analysis or routine military duties, he would continue operating with the Deep Operations Division as their primary asset for impossible missions. The galaxy was becoming a more dangerous place, and conventional solutions were proving inadequate against unconventional threats. Marcus accepted the assignment without hesitation, knowing that he had long since passed the point where he could return to his former life. The Void Syndicate had marked him for death, but they had also given him purpose. He would continue hunting them through the galaxy's shadows until one side or the other was completely destroyed. The war between the Coalition and the Syndicate would continue for years to come. But now the criminals had something new to fear. In the darkness between the stars, the Reaper waited for them. They had underestimated him at first, dismissing him as just another weak human who could be easily eliminated. They would never make that mistake again. As the Whisper disappeared into hyperspace carrying its deadly passenger toward his next mission, stories of the Reaper continued to spread throughout the galaxy. Criminal organizations began modifying their operations to account for the possibility that death itself might be hunting them. The name that had started as a simple file designation became a legend that children would whisper in the dark. Marcus Chen had become exactly what the galaxy needed him to be. A nightmare for nightmares, a darkness that hunted in the void between the stars. The Coalition might never fully trust him, and he might never again find peace in civilian life, but he had found his purpose at last. He was the Reaper, and the galaxy would never be the same.